Hi, Subhash Kaksa. Thanks for joining the Admin Show. And today's topic will be Panini, Rishi Panini, and then we'll briefly touch upon Patanjali. So before we move on to our slides, can you give us a brief introduction about yourself and Panini and Patanjali, a brief about everything?
Thank you. Thank you, for having me on your show. I'm a longtime professor of computer science and electrical engineering. I work on uh, languages. I worked on Sanskrit and Indian knowledge traditions. And in that tradition, Panini is a very big name because many centuries before our era, at least 2,500 years ago from now, he created a grammar for Sanskrit which remains unequaled to this date for any other language. He created a grammar almost like a computer program where there were rules and there were rules about rules. And that grammar is enough to check and produce any kind of Sanskrit sentence correctly. And nothing like that has been done since that time. So he is one of the giants of humanity.
Okay.
Somebody we should celebrate.
So I've also heard that actually Sanskrit is the language of God, and he gave rules and meaning to the language of the God.
Well, what that really means is when you say language of the gods, what you mean is the gods reside within us, in our cognitive centers. So, since the whole grammar is so efficient and so compact, so one could make the claim that they are the quickest way of representing how processing takes place inside the mind. Because you have sentence, and then from that sentence, our mind abstracts meaning. Now, when we are taught Sanskrit or taught any other language, we are first told about words which we have to remember and their meanings, and then grammatical rules. And then we are told how, given a sentence, if you analyze it, you will be able to find out what the meaning is. But of course, the mind doesn't quite work like that way, because when we are speaking, or you are speaking, or I'm speaking, you're not necessarily analyzing it. The mind gets the meaning all in one go. And therefore, what the claim that this is the language of the gods implies is that somehow this super efficient grammar represents the way the mind actually works. So it's just a claim. Yeah.
So let's go move on to a first question. Why is Panini called the creator of history of all the languages, and he's the father of linguists? I know you touched upon it, but just in brief, yeah.
Well, he's not a creator of Sanskrit, because Sanskrit was already there for a long, long time, for centuries, if not millennia. But what he did, and there were rishis before him, what he did was to come up with his grammar, right? And he was born somewhere in Gandhar, which is just west of Kashmir. So he was born there, and he did this. Now, father of linguistics. So what happened was, when the Europeans came to India and they started learning Sanskrit, they came across his grammar, and then they realized that, well, he's not talking only of Sanskrit, he's talking of an abstract system of rules. And perhaps similar abstract system of rules should apply to all human behavior, because language is a human behavior, right? Just as we go out and play soccer or whatever, we speak. That is, at another level. And just as we have rules for soccer, we have rules for language. And if so, similar rules should be true of other languages as well. And that's what gave the idea, or created the idea, of linguistics. Linguistics is the science of languages. So this then made people in Europe at that time study other languages also. Not that they were able to create anything like this grammar, because this grammar is unique, unequaled in history of mankind. But they tried to develop, grammatical rules for other languages, and that's what linguistics is. And it was also very important because, it's true that languages of India and Europe are very similar. So then people try to figure out, well, how is it that they may have diverged if there was a single language, or maybe through a process of diffusion, different languages try to converge into the languages that we have now in Europe and in India, right? So that was one. The second is that people realize that just as language or speech is a social activity, relationships in society is also a social activity, right? So they said, well, maybe there are similar laws or rules which can help us understand the nature of society. And anthropologists went to different, cultures or tribes which had been isolated for a long time, and they have different rules. There are certain things you can do, certain things are taboo, are not permitted in society, right? And certain things are allowed. For example, in certain societies, you cannot marry your first cousin, right? So that's taboo. In certain other societies, you can. So this provided a framework to examine the very structure of society. So truly, Panini is one of the most important figures in history. Now, another thing, late or mid 19th century, people started thinking about computation much more um, scientifically than had been done before. And there also, India has a great tradition. In fact, as we know, the number system that is used throughout the world developed in India, right, with the zero sign and so on. So, how do we do calculations in an abstract sense? And so there ultimately in the 20th century, before and after the Second World War, developed computer programming. So you have rules when you're doing calculations. See, for example, when you take a square root of a number, square root of 23, there is a definite rule, which is called an algorithm, right? Which you use to how to generate different digits of that expansion, right? 23, square root of 23 is 4 point something, right? And there is a definite rule which does that. And that's the beginning of computer programming. So they realized that the rules and rules about rules that are a part of the 4,000 rules of or sutras of Panini could also be the beginning of a computer programming language. So in a certain sense, Panini is not only the progenitor of linguistics or sociology, he's also the father of computer programming, because his rules are similar to the kind of rules that we have in a programming language, like Python or Fortran or whatever else that you have.
Yeah.
So extremely, extremely important what he did.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to Panini is known for his style Ashtadhyayi, a sutra style Sanskrit grammar which had 3959 verses. It had 8 chapters, and Panini made use of technical meta language consisting of syntax, morphology, and lexicon. Can you please briefly touch on this? I know you've been,
Okay.
but yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Ashtadhyayi, Adhyay, 8 chapters. So there are 8 chapters in it. And as you say, there are 3,959 sutras. A sutra is a small statement, right? Sutra really means thread.
Mhm.
So these are like little threads. And sutra is like a formula in Sanskrit. When you write a formula, you call it a sutra. So there is a structure, as you point out. There are statements of the sutra, but there's also something what are called the Maheshwar Sutrani right in the beginning. where the different aksharas of the Sanskrit Varnamala are represented in a shorthand way in different groups, right? So that is part of the meta language. So, just like when you write a computer program, you're not using a different language. You're using the same language to both describe the problem and the rules that are necessary to solve that problem, and then proceed thereafter. So likewise, Panini did that. And morphology means the structure. And lexicon, of course, means the entire vocabulary associated with the language. So, but as I said in the beginning, something similar theoretically can be done for any language, which is the greatness of what he did. So he was not just doing it within the context. Of course, he was doing it for Sanskrit, and he was doing it both these rules, both to include the ancient texts of the Vedas, as well as the more standard Sanskrit of his times. So, because languages all change slightly and well, greatly if you look across a big period of time. For example, if you read Old English about 1,000 years ago, it'll be almost incomprehensible, very, very difficult to read it. Now, Sanskrit, because of the standardization that his grammar created, Sanskrit after the time of Panini has almost remained constant. It's most amazing. And in that, there was a great role played by another grammarian who came after him, named Patanjali, who's also the great yoga teacher. So Patanjali wrote a commentary on Ashtadhyayi, and that commentary is called Mahabhashya.
Okay.
Mahabhashya meaning the great commentary. And he did it so well that it sort of established the prestige of Panini's grammar for centuries to come.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Then I know you've been mentioning about the rules. Can you just briefly touch upon the rules of Panini's grammar?
Okay, so here, see, for example, this is how these sutras are written. They're very compact.
Okay.
For example, the very first one is Vriddhi Adaicha, right? So it's very simple. So the two sutras consist of a list of phonemes followed by a technical term. What I said, the Maheshwar Sutrani, those represent these phonemes, the aksharas of the Sanskrit Varnamala, can be put into different groups. For example, if you say aha means all the phonemes, because the very first akshar is and the very last one, her, is her. So if you say her, you're talking of all of them. So a rule which applies to all of them would bring in her in there, right? But if you wanted to talk of a subset, you have a set, a collection of elements, and then you have subsets. So those subsets are likewise represented in a very shorthand way. So this is where the power of this representation came in, because he could have also then talked of each one of them, but that would have meant many lines to explain that this is not only true for this is also true for etc., right? Now, of course, as we know, the Sanskrit Varnamala is very scientific. You have the vowels in the beginning, then you have the consonants, right? The swaras and the vyanjanas, swar and vyanjan, right? So and incidentally, before I forget, the Varnamala, the Sanskrit Varnamala has had influence even on chemistry. I don't know whether you're aware of it. When you did chemistry in school, you must have done Mendeleev's periodic table.
Periodic table, yeah.
of Mendeleev. Now,
Yeah,
Mendeleev,
hydrogen helium. Yeah, I know.
yeah,
Remember we mugged it up.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Mendeleev was this Russian chemist, and at that time, Sanskrit was very, very in thing. It was the cool thing to do. So he was aware of the Sanskrit Varnamala. So what he tried to do was to represent the elements that he knew at that time, because not all the elements of the periodic table that we have now were known in the 19th century. So he tried to represent it in a two-dimensional form, because the Varnamala is a two-dimensional thing, right? You have ka, ka, ga, ga, nya,
Yeah,
cha, cha. So there is a left to right and top to bottom, right? So that's what he tried to do for the chemical elements as well. And then in that table, there were a few gaps. So he gave them Sanskrit names, which reveals the direct connection with Sanskrit. But once those elements were actually discovered experimentally, then their names were changed. But when he wrote his famous paper, he gave them Sanskrit names. So the Varnamala, of course, I'm sure it was there before Panini, but clearly, Panini used that, has had tremendous influence even beyond grammar, as we just saw.
okay. All right. So I think, do you know about this? There is like Indian PhD student. He cracked up what is makes the algorithm unique. Like the 500-year-old Sanskrit grammar problem in Ashtadhyayi has been solved by Dr. Rishi Rajaput, 27-year-old PhD candidate at Cambridge University. So,
Yeah. This is a story which went around a couple of months ago.
yeah.
And basically, what he did, I don't remember the details, was that there is maybe an ambiguity in one of the rules. And he said, well, this is how you should be looking at it. And this is what Panini meant. So I think it's a very minor thing. And after he published it, there are a lot of other grammarians who they said, no, he was, what he was uh, seeing as a major problem or a problem was really not a problem.
Okay.
So I think that's a very small thing.
Okay. All right. So Ashtadhyayi. So can you just little bit what is this Ashtadhyayi Sutra part? Can you please little bit?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ashta means eight.
Uh-huh.
Adhyaya means chapters, right? Sutra are the rules. Sutra in Sanskrit means a thread. Path means recitation. Ashtadhyayi Sutra Pathaha, right? So these kids who wanted to learn Sanskrit had to memorize these rules. So what they did was, for example, this is Pratyahar Sutrani. So these are the various groups. I, U, Na is one group. So when you say Erna, that means I, U, Na, and so on. These are the various groups that you have, right? If you say Jasha, that would mean Jaba, Gada, Dasha, right? So basically, without going into the details, the kids memorize these rules. And once they had memorized these rules, and as they grew older, they knew which rule to go to in case there was ambiguity in a construction. When you write any language, for example, I don't know how when you write English, I can tell you about myself. I didn't formally learn English. I just learned English through absorption, like most people do when you're growing up. Of course, I was not growing up in an English-speaking home. I was growing up in a maybe a bilingual home where our languages were Kashmiri and Hindi. My mother would speak to us in Kashmiri, and my father also sometimes. But since we are growing up for some time in Jammu, where a lot of people spoke Hindi, so often we spoke back in Hindi, but also we spoke in Kashmiri, right? So as a child, you internalize the rule of the language just by listening to what your mother or your father or people around you are saying. If you're growing up, the child is growing up in a home in America, they would know somehow naturally what is the correct construction, right? And they know it by virtue of having heard so many sentences And that's where the mind comes in. And the mind knows what is right and what's not right. Now, how I learned English was that later on, when I was much older, I just read a lot of stuff, but still, my grammar would sometimes be wrong. So how do I check it now? Since I write quite a bit, if I have a doubt, I just Google it and I put my sentence, Google it, and see if others have used a similar construction. And maybe this is how the mind works, right? So this is how I know what I'm saying is right or wrong. Now, here in Ashtadhyayi Sutra Path, since the kids have memorized all the 4,000 rules, approximately 4,000 rules, they know where to go in the back of the mind. So they don't have to actually check it out anymore. But right now, the Ashtadhyayi Sutras are on Google, right? You can on the internet, so you can actually go and see which one you might need in case you do want to check it. But there are two aspects to it. One is uh, they focus on the recitation, which is part, made people pay less attention to the fact that ultimately the meaning is derived from the vakya, from the sentence, and not from the words, because the words can mean different things in different sentences or in different contexts. You see that? And that's where another grammarian who lived many centuries after Panini, maybe even 1,000 years after Panini, named Bhartrihari came in. And I'm not saying that Panini did not emphasize it. Panini perhaps wanted it to be done that way. But for some time, his prestige was so much that people focused only on the sutras and not as much on the sentences. And Bhartrihari came along and he said, and he wrote a book called Vakya Padiya. And he said, the meaning is in the Vakya. And teaching should therefore be sentence centric. In fact, since we are doing Panini, my whole theory on why Sanskrit has not grown as rapidly recently as it ought to have, given all the amazing wisdom that resides in Sanskrit, is because of the focus on grammar rather than the focus on sentences and on speech. You know, just as I said, a kid learns a language at home without being told what the grammar is. So if you want Sanskrit to spread, and it should be spread because it is the repository of the most incredible knowledge, which is still relevant, especially knowledge about what consciousness is, which is the frontier of science. Atma Vidya is, consciousness is Atma Vidya, right? Which is the very heart of Indian wisdom. The Atman show, right? I should be saying that in the The Atman show. So I think the time has come to focus back on the Vakya, on sentences. And I think Sanskrit Bharati is doing that. You know, spoken Sanskrit. Just don't bother the child with all the grammar. Just speak. And part of the grammar would be revealed by the mind. And that's where the idea of Deva Bhasha comes in.
Yeah.
Because the
And your
mind
voice.
is the Devata, or the various centers in the mind are the Devata. And they will reveal the structure, not in terms of the sutras of Ashtadhyayi, but they'll reveal them in their own way. And then somebody who wanted to do grammar on a more comprehensive way can go and learn the Ashtadhyayi sutras.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I know, I understand that there are 8 chapters, and looks like this Pratamodhyay would be the first chapter.
Yeah.
Obviously will not go in all 8 chapters, like just what is in the Pratamodhyay.
Yeah. So that is the Prathamo or Prathama Adhyaya, the first Adhyaya. So these are the various rules. And as you know, they are not talking about there's nothing about Sanskrit. You know, these are the rules. So these are the rules about how to do how to combine the various akshara, the sandhi and the sandhi vicheda. You know, when you come across a Sanskrit sentence, it is normally combined together. and you don't know where to break up, where the words are, and what are the correct way to combine words. That is one of the elements, right? The sandhi, the joining of the phonemes. The whole question is, and it's a miracle really, how do we communicate meaning? Sounds, the elemental sounds, the primary sounds. These are the phonemes, right? The aksharas. So how do they take us from these sounds to the most abstract meanings in our mind? And what Panini is doing is taking these elemental sounds, the primary sounds, and showing how they ought to be combined, or what is the correct way of combining them, so that they'll take you to both the Vedic Sanskrit as well as the standard Sanskrit that the educated person spoke during his time, and which subsequent to him has become the standard that classical Sanskrit has used for at least 25 centuries.
Okay. So do you think that Sanskrit language influenced all the languages in the world?
That's a very interesting question.
Mm.
Not all, certainly there were societies which were not connected. You look at languages of Americas, they were totally different. Or Chinese language is a very different kind of a language. It's a language. It's not. It's in Chinese. Well, firstly, Chinese has two aspects. One is the spoken language. The other is the written script. The written form is a code. In China, there can be people who speak mutually incomprehensible languages, right? But they write what they say in the same way. Did you know that? The Chinese script is a kind of a code which is not tied to the way the language is spoken. And therefore, people can speak differently, mutually incomprehensible. Their utterance can be mutually incomprehensible, but they would write the same code, which is, of course, a genius. There's a great way that created, which happened, arose in the Chinese part of the world, and that has been very central to the very nature of the Chinese civilization. So, in some sense, that provides that kind of uniformity, but it also, by this uniformity, which is top down, because there are about 80,000
About
signs
80,000 signs. Okay.
of Chinese, right? Now, most people can't remember 80,000 signs. And therefore, there is a whole gradation. If you are a scholar, maybe you know 20,000, 40, 50,000. If you're a scholar of the language, maybe more. But an average person would only know maybe a few hundred, right? 800 or 1,000. So there is a whole gradation. And that gradation is also expressed in the very organization of society. So it's become center focused society, right? Now, Sanskrit is very different because uh, Sanskrit is connected to the spoken word. You speak it the way you write it down. There is a one-to-one correspondence. And that one-to-one correspondence has been a unique aspect of the way language is being used in India, and not only in Sanskrit, but all the daughter languages. But now let me come back to your question. So certain languages are different, like Chinese is different, Japanese is different, Turkic languages are different. Although the Turkish languages were influenced by Sanskrit because these missionaries from India, Buddhist missionaries, went up to the Turkic world about 500 BCE and thereafter. And there are many, say, Mongolian words which are derived from Sanskrit, right? And there are, according to scholars, about 30,000 words were coined in the Chinese language itself. Of course, not they were created, but they were made a part of the Chinese vocabulary. Okay. Now, what happened was that um, Indian languages and European languages connection, that's very important. Now, certainly, connection between Sanskrit or Indian languages and Africa is different because there was not that much of interaction, excepting by the Gujaratis in East Africa for a few centuries. As you know, the word in Swahili for lion is Simba, which is from Simha, right? So there were many words which were adopted, which became a part of the African language, but that's only a few assorted words. Now, the connection between European languages and Sanskrit is very deep. And there are many theories. There's one theory is that maybe the Indian and the European people lived at the same place many thousands of years ago. And from this place, they spread out in different directions and they took their language and their grammar. And now what we have in Europe and India are the daughter languages. And that's been a part of a lot of politics for the past couple of 100 years, because each region has wanted to say in this framework that we are the original region. See, in the beginning, they said, well, at that time, German linguists were influential. So they said Germany was the original homeland of the Indian Europe or Indian and European people. Then people said maybe it was Russia. Then they said maybe it was Ukraine. But now, as India is becoming richer, and India was, as you know, the richest country in the world for until say 1800, certainly until 1000, 45% of the world economy was India, and China was 30%. Europe was maybe only 10-15%. So India was certainly more influential. So now there's a paper which was published only recently, 3-4 months ago, in a journal called Science, which argued that maybe it was not north of Caucasus, but south of Caucasus, namely near Iranian highlands, which was the original home of the Indian and European languages. Now, there are lots of scholars in India who are saying that maybe Northwest India was the original home. And their argument is that of all the Indian and European languages, the most ancient is Sanskrit. You know, if you look at the Vedas, it's the most ancient. And also in Sanskrit, you have, let's say, 50 words for home. You know, home is graha, for example, or avasa, for example, or haryam. Avasa is like house, right? Graha is like ghar in Persian as well. So if you look at this, you find that, let's say there are 50 words, and these 50 words are found at different places in Europe. And no one of those languages has all the 50 words. Only Sanskrit has all the 50 words. If you have 50 words for God, for divinity in Sanskrit, for example, one of the words for divinity in Sanskrit is Bhaga or Bhagavan, right? In Russia, the word for God is Bhaga, right? But another word for God in Sanskrit is Devata or Div, right? Divya, divine. In Latin, the word is div also. Divinity is a Latin word from Latin, right? So you have all the different words in Sanskrit and only scattered amongst them in different European languages. So just as if you look at potato, potato spread from the Americas to all over the world. And potato was saved Europe during in the Middle Ages. You know, there used to be famines from time to time. The wheat harvest used to fail, and then people would die. And then potato came along. Although there was a potato famine also, there was a disease that potato got in the 19th century in Ireland. That's why a lot of Irish people came to America. But in any event, where do we know potato came from? Potato's original home is Peru, because all the different species of potato are in Peru in different levels. While in America or India or China, you find only one or two because they were taken from Peru and brought to different parts of the world. So likewise, if you look at the vocabulary of European languages, you find all those words in Sanskrit and only some of them in different European languages. So what would that mean? That perhaps the theory that Northwest India, because that's where the Vedas speak of Aryavata, of of Sapta Sindhu. The original name for India was Sapta Sindhu, where these seven rivers flow. Sapta Sandhav. From Sapta Sandhav is probably the word Hindu comes from Sandhav or Handhav, Hindu. Okay, not from Indus River. That's a later theory. From not from the Sindhu River. Sapta Sandhav is, or Sapta Sindhu is how the Vedic region is called within India. So this is where you had all this amazing language, this amazing vocabulary, which is huge, and with amazing knowledge of Atma Vidya, which is why I tell people that really, if you want to make progress in your own self understanding, Sanskrit is a good thing. Not that you necessarily become a master, you don't have to, you're not going to be writing in Sanskrit, but to be connected to Sanskrit literature in a much more fundamental way than only reading translations. And it's easy for Indians because every Indian language is really a form of Sanskrit. You look at Gujarati, it's all Sanskrit words spoken in a slightly different way, right? There's a classical way of pronouncing words, and in Sanskrit, in Gujarati or Hindi or Marathi or Bengali, the language and the words have slightly changed. And but the words are the same, the roots are the same, and we can connect to the original so quickly. So, okay, to come back to your question, yes, it does appear that the languages of Europe and India most likely were derived from Sanskrit, most likely because of this new vocabulary argument, which I gave in my book, The Idea of India, which was not a part of this conversation amongst scholars. And as Victor Meyer, the famous Chinese sinologist from University of Pennsylvania, has argued, that about 30,000 words of the Chinese language itself are derived from Sanskrit. So India is not the mother of all languages. Sanskrit is not the mother of all languages, but it's had tremendous influence all over the world. And now, through the medium of European languages, into all corners of the world. And now also directly, because in all corners of the world, what people are doing right now is yoga. Yoga is the biggest thing. Whether you go to the smallest hamlet in Chile or Peru, you'll find a yoga studio. And if you're doing yoga studio, you'll also do Yoga Sutra. And once you do Yoga Sutra, you are connected to Sanskrit in a fundamental way, yoga chitta vritti nirodha, right? So you come to those words, and these words are impacting everybody in every corner of the world.
Yeah, and yoga and meditation are related. Like I did an episode with one of my friends. She's done like 200 hours of teachers training. So we did that. That's very interesting. Like the yoga pose and the chant with mantra that you do, it activates your chakras. So yeah, yeah.
There is a neurophysiological research, and you can Google it and you'll find it. It's been published also in Scientific American, which has shown that people who do Sanskrit chanting, their cortex increases in size. The brain continuously changes based on what we do. So they've discovered that really there is a influence on the very organization of the brain. Now, of course, there are some people who say that, well, maybe if you chant it in some other language also, there will be beneficial effect. We don't know. But certainly Sanskrit is unique because Sanskrit is so connected to the very root sounds. That's where Panini comes in, since we are talking about Panini. So when you're doing a word, for example, you're saying the word dharma, the word dra, which means to uphold. So every word is derived from a root, from a dhatu, from a phoneme. And that, when you're chanting, you are sort of internalizing that derivation. And that's what is the meaning of going to the devatas within you. And it's in that sense, it is Deva Bhasha. Do you see that? Because the devatas within you. Devatas are the cognitive centers within you.
Yeah.
You have the brain, but the brain doesn't do the understanding, as the Upanishads very correctly point out. It's not that the brain is finding what the meaning is. Brain, or the eye is not seeing, the ear is not listening. Eye is only an instrument. The ear is only an instrument, right? Our body is only an instrument in touch. The feeling and the seeing and the smelling is all done by the Atman within us, by the self within us, right? So that self has these agents, and those are the devatas, those are the cognitive centers. And therefore, chanting in Sanskrit, uh, meditation gives you access to your latent capacities. And those capacities bring you to the true powers that are a part of yourself, which is what you are really supposed to exercise. And sometimes you feel very unhappy is because the way you're living, you have separated yourself from all these capacities within you, and your body is unhappy, so the body is sending you signals. The body is not in a state of ease, so it is in a state of dis-ease, right? So it's unhappy. So the body and the mind sends you signals and says, please wake up. It tells the mind, please wake up. Don't do this. And that's where our good friend Panini, Rishi Panini, what he did is such a great lesson to us, to be inspired and to be empowered, self-empowered.
Okay. All right. So last, like, can I know we already talked about Varnamala, but can you just for our viewers, can you tell in a basic form?
Okay, the Sanskrit Varnamala or alphabet is the swaras. The swaras are a, a, e, u. These are vowels. Re, re, a, I, o, a, ang, aha. Right? These are the swaras. These are where you're just letting the utterance come through your mouth. When your mouth, you're opening your mouth differently as you produce the swaras. These are the vowels, right? And the vyanjans are where there is a you have to stop, through the tongue and lip, etc. And that's how you produce the consonants. So the vyanjan and the swara together um, are, the vyanjan by itself, without the swara, is no sound at all. So ka becomes ka only when it's combined with That's why you have a halant, the mark below ka, which means that it doesn't have the swara associated with it. So ka can be associated with different swaras. And then you also have antastha, yara, lava, and shasha, saha, right? These are parts. The vyanjans are the 5 families, each of 5. 5 times 5 is 25, and 8 is 33, plus the various swaras. And as I said, this is the father or the mother also of the Mendeleev's periodic table.
Yeah. This is like very new. I did
Yeah.
not know that. Okay, so moving on to your I know you published article in medium.com. So just took this picture from there, and can you tell me how is Patanjali related to Kashmir and how he also carried forward Panini's grammar and things like that, like just in a nutshell, in a brief.
As I said briefly, who made Panini famous
Mhm.
was Patanjali's commentary on Ashtadhyayi, which is called Mahabhashya. Now, Patanjali has been celebrated right from the beginning. Even Bhartrihari says that Patanjali was not only a grammarian, but he was also a yogi and a Vaidya. So Patanjali did Mahabhashya. He also did Yoga Sutra. This is within the Indian tradition. There are some scholars who say, how could he have done all of this? Maybe there were three different Patanjalis.
Right.
And he also did Patanjali Tantra, right, which is a contribution to Ayurveda. So Patanjali, according to the Indian tradition, and that tradition is very ancient because Bhartrihari lived about 500 CE, which is a long, long time ago. So he remembered that tradition also, and now of course, uh, Patanjali's this particular picture I put in my essay, which you can read on medium.com, Patanjali and his times. This is Shiva's family because Shiva is considered the greatest yogi, Mahayogi, right? And here is Shiva, and there is Parvati, and there are these two children, which is Skanda and Ganesha, right? And of course, this smiling fellow is Parvati's lion or Parvati's tiger, right?
Okay,
So the smiling.
one minute. I just want to, you said what's Skanda? Like I thought it's Kartika and Ganesha.
Yeah, Kartikeya and Skanda are the same, are two names for the same person.
Okay, 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 okay. All right.
Skanda means who flies up, jumps up, right? Because he's also the commander in chief of the gods.
Okay, okay.
You know, these are all code words for the nature of the mind. Who Shiva is our consciousness. Shiva is within us. Shiva is the light which illuminates the mind. And Parvati is the point, is Prakriti, where this light is received. See, that's why Shiva and Parvati come together. And Ganesha, you know, in our consciousness, when you look at the chakras, Ganesha is the presiding deity of the Mooladhara chakra. Mooladhara chakra is where the felt consciousness arises within us. And of course, it's all mapped in the brain. So Ganesha and Skanda are aspects of the reflection of this light within us. The light is Shiva. And us, we ourselves are Parvati, each one of us. Doesn't matter, male, female, nature, Prakriti. We are all Prakriti, right? Which is the reason, you know, there's some people who are foolish who don't know this. They say, hey, how does Krishna dance with all the gopis? Yeah. Right? Hey, Krishna is a philanderer. Why does he dance with all the gopis? Krishna, there is that the self within us, the Atma. That's another name. You know, you can call Atma the light, Prakash, or Shiva. Shiva means auspicious. It's that light which makes the world comprehensible to us. It's that auspicious light, right? But you can also view that light as the self within us, who is Krishna. And then each one of us is a gopi in that sense, because each one of us is Prakriti. Exactly. When people
you also did Prakriti in that in your you know the Newton's episode that we did, you know, you also had that Prakriti triangle.
Oh, absolutely. Prakriti, right. Absolutely. Prakriti has different aspects, right? So Shiva and Shakti. So yeah. Prakriti is a triangle and Shiva has a triangle also, right? Shiva and Shakti. Because Shiva is shown as triangle pointed upwards and Prakriti is triangle going backwards. In fact, the Star of David is the Shiva Shakti yantra.
Before I let you go, do you have anything to say to my viewers of The Atman Show?
Well, keep on watching the Atman Show, and there's a lot of wonderful stuff that Anamika ji is putting together, and we should, you know, that is Samudra Manthan. Watching this show and other shows is Samudra Manthan, and when you do that, you get transformed, and that's what is reaching out for Amrit, which each one of us should aspire to.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Namaste.
Namaste.